Bloom News Brief. More info at fullandbloom.com. In a recent interview with Metal Edge, Creed and Alter Bridge guitarist Mark Tremonti talked about some of the guitar players and music he loved during the 80s. I love Tesla, and I think Miles Kennedy was the one who pointed that out to me one time. He said, "Now that I know you're a big fan of Tesla, I hear Frank Hannon's guitar playing all in your style." And thinking back on it, I realized, yeah, Frank definitely had a huge influence on my playing. His fingerstyle parts, like the beginning to Love Song, his lead guitar lines, I loved them and I learned them, and they definitely seeped into my writing and guitar playing. I didn't realize it until Miles said that, but he just has a classy sound. He isn't overindulgent, but then he can also do those killer shreddy runs, like in Modern Day Cowboy and stuff like that. Those songs just have a lot of heart and soul in them. On Ratt, I thought Warren DeMartini was great for that genre. I think of all the kind of over-the-top, big-hair 80s bands, Ratt was one of the best, and Warren DeMartini was great for that type of playing. His solos were just killer and really well put together. I must have learned a dozen of them. I would just learn the solo and not the rest of the song. I treated it like its own little song. One time I remember talking to my producer who recorded their last album, 2010's Infestation, and he was telling me, yeah, Warren didn't really pre-plan his solos. He'd go in there and just improvise and kind of piece them together, which is crazy because when you listen to some of his solos, they don't sound like they're improvised. They sound like they're composed. He has such a great natural approach to the guitar. On Metallica, Master of Puppets was 100% the album that changed my life. That was the magic elixir that transformed me from somebody who was a fan of music to somebody who was obsessed with music. Before I listened to that album, I was just like everybody else I went to school with. The big bands were stuff like the Beastie Boys, and then the alternative kids were listening to like the Violent Femmes and the Clash and this and that. But then I remember one night I couldn't fall asleep and went to my brother's room. Upstairs from my room, my brother shared a loft. And my oldest brother, his whole room was covered in like Fangoria magazine gore and guts and everything. And he would listen to commercial rock like Van Halen and Kiss and Ted Nugent. But then my older brother listened to extreme stuff like Venom and Slayer and Metallica. And so this one night I couldn't go to sleep and I was like, "Hey man, what's that song I hear about a sanitarium? It sounds pretty cool." And he's like, "Well, that's Master of Puppets." And he gave me the tape, this little white cassette that I still have. I just remember staying up almost all night listening to that record on this little stereo my parents had bought me. It had a graphic analyzer and it gave me the light show all night long. I was just in a trance. So that's still my favorite record of all time. I could listen to it non-stop. Orion is my favorite song, definitely one of my favorite songs of all time. On Ozzy Osbourne, we usually think of Ozzy as heavy metal, but there was a point in the mid-80s where he kind of fell into that glam world, like the Ultimate Sin album, which I loved. When people ask, "What's your favorite Ozzy record?" I say that one, and they'll say, "But there's so many better records." But back then, when you were a kid, you could only afford a certain amount of records, and that was the one I owned, so I played it all the time. I knew every word and every note, and Killer of Giants was one of my favorite songs ever. And you know, another thing about that record is that you have Jake E. Lee on guitar. Jake was awesome. His style is so recognizable. You hear it, and you hear Jake E. Lee, and you hear his personality. He's got a big personality in his playing, and it's all over the Ultimate Sin. I think I read somewhere that Ozzy didn't like that album too much, but I love it. To read the entire feature, click the link in the description.